Hello, everybody, and welcome to podcast number 143 of the Gordon and Cherise show. And it is so good to be back with you, everybody that is tuning in, because we've taken a pretty long time away. It's been a little bit of an interruption as life has been unfolding, but let me tell you, the healing modalities continue. We're back with you because we want to bring you a very special time, a very special conversation. Gordon and I would love to introduce you to Mike Pinkston from Heart Matters and Jen Fowler, who is really Mike's boss, we've just established. She's over everything.
She is.
And Mike is the clinical and the executive director of Heart Matters.
Right.
And heart does matter. I think we've kind of determined that. And if I could just explain how we got connected. I know,
Okay.
Gordon, you have studied, you have questions to ask.
No,
too.
actually, I'd like to say hello, Cherise. That would be nice to start the
Please
podcast.
say hello.
So would
Okay.
I. Nice to see you, Cherise.
Nice to see you.
But why don't you go ahead and do this, because this was one of the effective modalities for you while you were going through your cancer treatment.
Exactly. Well, it all began actually before cancer, and enter the world of real estate that I do. That is my day job, I would say. But going into a client's house that I have known for years. And I walked in, and real estate in general, and just the whole idea of buying or selling or change or transition, I would notice in the past there was a lot of triggers to that in his life. And this gentleman is, I think he's in his 70s. And I love the man. I really love him. When I saw him on the last visit, which was it was over a year ago now, he was cooler than a cucumber in the middle of a real estate transaction, in the middle of trying to make really big decisions. I noticed that he was completely calm. I noticed that there were no triggers, and he seemed to be so present in the conversation. And I just was amazed at that relationship, because again, I've shared a lot of deep conversations with these clients. They're friends, they feel like family. I know that he was triggered because of post-traumatic stress with being in the military. And so he carried the stress for, I mean, his whole adult life practically. So to see that change in him, and in my own personal life, and this was before I knew anything about the cancer side of things, I just felt like my own brain was running amok. And I didn't want to medicate it or sedate it. I didn't know what to do to feel like I could get some reprieve myself. But when I noticed that his anxiety was less, it gave me a lot of hope that there was a modality that I was unaware of. And he said, have you ever heard of neurofeedback?
Oh, I was going to ask you.
Yeah.
Is this somebody we know?
Yes, you've worked with him.
Really?
Okay.
That's
And
awesome.
so he was the one that referred me to you guys. And
I know who it is, but
you definitely know. And I just have to thank him. I will not say the name, but I will just say thank you if you're listening, because this connection has meant so much. So enter the world of Heart Matters. And literally, the day that I got capped to start the process, the day that my brain got read for the first time in my life, was the same day I went to another doctor for a hormone checkup, and he saw that I had a growth where he was about to apply a pellet. And it was the same day where he said, you have to get that checked. I'm very worried about you. So the day that neurofeedback started for me was the same day a cancer journey began.
wow.
And I would say this, that in my own personal experience of doing the neurofeedback, even as I've gone through the cancer treatment and everything else, I know I'm talking so much, and forgive me, you're going to have plenty of time to talk. I just want to say thank you, because this modality, I felt like it it helped my brain find a net so that I didn't feel like I was falling in the middle of things in my life where normally I think I would have felt like I was in a bottomless pit. And so I could, even as I've been fighting some chronic issues, I can feel that my brain has been healing.
Awesome.
So that is why I want to introduce you guys. And thank you, because both of you have been a huge part in my life in the healing journey that God has me on.
Awesome.
That's fantastic.
It is.
Let's go ahead and get started about the guests. And Mike, you're the originator, owner of Heart Matters.
Right.
Okay. How did you get started with neurofeedback? And for someone who doesn't know what it is, I'd like to hear your personal story. What is neurofeedback exactly?
Well, how I got started is somewhat interesting. I have been a counselor, licensed professional counselor for 44 years.
Okay.
So my prayer has always been, God, give me something better. And I read a book by, I can't think of the guy's name, Bill Johnson, called Dreaming with God. And from that book, daily I started praying, give me something better. And so, I mean, that's always in the backdrop, if you will. And so I had this client come in, and he was had been a previous client years before, and he's coming in to tell me a horrible story, and he's just really broken, but he's so appropriate and moderate with what he's expressing, and it's not a pretty story. I can't repeat it, but it was a horrible story. But he was so I'd never seen him like that, and so he's telling me the story, and I'm just noticing the difference in him. It's kind of like what you were talking about. And finally, I just said, "Wait a minute," and he said, "What?" And I said, "What happened to you?" And he goes, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well," and he's very with it in terms of recovery and things like that. And I said, "You're just, I mean, this is horrible, but you're appropriate with it. I mean, you're not throwing a chair through the window because you're so angry." He was a professional hockey player, so at one time, so he probably did stuff like that. He said, "Well, I was practicing." He was trying to get on the PGA Tour, and I'd actually done some coaching with him on that, and so I knew where he played and where he practiced. He says, "I was at the golf club, and the cart girl came up, and we started talking, and she said I ought to try doing neurofeedback." And so I did. And so the next part of the story is he's there, except that I thought I might know who that person was. And so I'll just use Brenda. I said, "Did that girl, was her name Brenda?" And he goes, "Yeah, how did you know that?" Now he's looking at me weird. And I said, "Well, I've known Brenda's family since I was a teenager, and her dad was a college roommate, went to graduate school at Denver Seminary with me, and he's a counselor as well. And I know that part of her story was that when she was 15, she had her first psychotic break. And because I knew this family, his brother was bipolar and not the calm type, the kind that's we do pretty bizarre things. And so I called her dad and I said, "How's Brenda doing?" And he said, "Well, she went to Dallas to do neurofeedback with another friend of ours that was also a college roommate. I didn't know he was doing neurofeedback." And and she came back, and she's never been on medication, and she's never had another episode. And she was working on getting her degree as well, and she was going to go into neurofeedback, which she's done. And so then I called the other guy, and just was, I didn't know he had been doing it. He'd been doing it for like 25 years, and he was doing a different form of neurofeedback than we do. His was very simple comparatively, and it was much more like what they did in the very beginning back in the 60s. But he scared me, almost scared me away from it, because he was, we were talking shop, and he says, "Now, if you're ever treating somebody with bipolar, don't ever train them here. It'll set off a manic episode." Well, that scared me.
Oh, my.
And then he started telling me about, this kid who'd come in with ADHD, and they started treating him, and he developed a tic. And he says, "No big deal." And I'm going, "No big deal? I mean, if he was my son, I brought him to you, and he didn't have a tic, and now he has a tic. Are you crazy?" And so it literally just, I went, I don't know if I want to have, I don't want to start people having tics and manic episodes.
Doesn't sound like the answer to your prayer. There's something better.
So I called back my client, and I said, "Who did you see?" And he told me, and so I went and met with her. She's in Denver, and she was doing at the time the kind of neurofeedback similar to what we do, which is called Z-score neurofeedback. Z-score has to do with everything's compared to a norm, and we're training norms. So we're going from out of norm to norm, and the original neurofeedback, it was, and still practiced today, it's training waves, brain waves. And we do train brain waves and a whole lot more, but so it just so happened that soon after that, I met a guy here in town named Dr. Steve Stockdale, who's one of my heroes and super guy, and he introduced me to Dr. Joel Lubar. And Dr. Joel Lubar is one of the top, or was, he just passed away a couple of months ago, but he's one of the top brain people in the country. And neurofeedback, he was the first person. So neurofeedback actually started with NASA and astronauts, and if you want to hear that, I'll tell you. But Joel was the first to actually go with the general public, and he opened up a clinic and a research center at University of Tennessee, Knoxville, which is where I was from. I didn't know him when I was there. But he, what I found is that there are people that have been in the business a long time, and they kind of have stayed with the more, I don't know what to call it. I want to say primitive, but it's not primitive. It's just the basic
Maybe
surface.
traditional.
Traditional neurofeedback is what's really called, surface neurofeedback.
You're not surface, Mike.
No, I don't think we do anything surface. So and the surface neurofeedback was what was had scared me, and so I talked to Joel about it, because he was doing this new technology, and there's it's a whole different ball game in terms of what you have to learn and about the brain and things of that nature. And in fact, most people who practice neurofeedback know very little about the brain. They may know protocols that somebody taught them, but they don't know why they're doing that protocol. And then there are others who are very well educated about it. And so Joel mentored me, and what was different about Joel is that he didn't stop growing. When the technology changed, and basically our neurofeedback is training down in the structures of the brain, down in the brain versus on the surface, which are attempting to hit spots down in the brain.
Okay, so let me help interject on this. So
Okay.
the
Please do.
traditional neurofeedback has been more like surface EEG type readings,
Yes.
and then your
Causing tics.
sounds like
No.
it, Trace.
Or mania.
And then the Z score that's associated with the Loretta method,
Yes.
and that is more of 3D imaging that is more precise and it's more targeted,
Yes.
Deeper.
into the brain.
And it's more. I mean, like surface is, one or two locations, whereas what we do, I call it metrics, but let's say at most it's 4 metrics at a time, where what we do can be 1,000 metrics at
Wow.
a time. And we're training not only down in the brain, but we're also training how the brain communicates with itself.
Well, Cherise showed me her first mapping results. And then she said, we have to look at yours. And I said, based on yours, I am not doing this.
I will say it's one thing to know that you do this. It's another when that cap goes on your head, and
is.
then the process, just for people to know what to expect. Like, I went into the clinic, I got capped. What does that mean? It means that Jen she is like the secret weapon in here. Okay, because she can cap, and then she loves gel because the gel has to
do.
interact
Yeah.
with the cap. So then my head is literally gelled. I mean, it looks really old school.
Yeah.
I wish I was back in the 80s or something where I could have it do that and make it look cool. But anyway, so you get the cap, you get the gel, and then you hook up. Explain what you did to me on that first
So
session.
basically, it's a cap. We kind of describe it as a swim cap, right? And it's got 19 electrodes on it. And so basically all we're doing, we're putting the cap on. It's a tight fit, not painful, but tight. And we're getting those electrodes to connect to the electricity that your brainwaves are producing. And that's how we read your brain and create the brain maps.
Right.
So
And
the
so-
gel is just salt that helps with that connectivity.
It's like a
Yeah.
conduction.
Right.
So on your journey to discover neurofeedback, I'm hearing things like ADHD, cognitive impairment, trauma-based situations,
Anxiety.
post-traumatic stress disorder. I'm hearing those type of conditions require neurofeedback,
Well, I don't know if they require it, but
or they
or
would
can be.
Can benefit from
can
it.
benefit from neurofeedback. What about someone who's just busy, they're an entrepreneur and they're stressed out to the max, or someone's had a tough marriage, or life is just taking over? Will neurofeedback help them renew their mind or have a different outlook?
Yeah, neurofeedback can be used in business contexts, like you're saying, or just daily stresses, or sports. I mean, there are many professional athletes that do neurofeedback to help them have peak performance, make better and quicker decisions. That's one of the things that we do with our first responders. One guy I'm thinking of, he was, one of the things I said to him is that we can not only help you make faster decisions, but better decisions, and that saves lives. And he was tested just before he started, and then he was tested at pretty much when he was close to the end. And his scores had gone up 10 times. I mean, he was 10 times faster and 10 times more accurate.
And within that, though, he had pretty significant PTSD.
Oh, good Lord, yeah.
And so even just if you look at just the PTSD that was treated through neurofeedback, and think how much that frees up his mind now that he's not being triggered
Right.
I
every
was
time he
literally
turns
saying
around.
it cleared headspace.
Literally,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah.
Do you find that with neurofeedback that you manipulate the process, or does the brain learn a process? Like, does the brain adapt to a process?
Well, again, you have to think, I mean, ours is very different than what NASA was doing, but we're working from out of norm into norm. We're not trying to manipulate anything. We're looking at what is out of norm.
Right.
And,
Let's get it
and,
norm.
and then we're training it back into norm. And we're doing, like I said, we might have 1,000 metrics that are being trained 182 times a second while you're just watching a movie. And it's just very easy for you, but a whole lot of stuff is going on. And we're bringing those things in the norm, and as things normalize, then symptoms start disappearing.
It's true. Well, Jen, I mean, I got to go through the entire Mandalorian series.
Yep.
40
We had a good
sessions
time.
of neurofeedback. And literally the last session was the very ending
Yep.
of that. And so one thing I think is exceptionally kind about it, especially for those of us who have experienced deep trauma in life, is that it's not trauma provoking, because this is not talk therapy.
Right. It's not
So
triggering.
it isn't. In fact, what I found though is that doing it, as you mentioned before, like for the other guy that had this space to then enhance his IQ, because the PTSD was, I feel like it integrated and created space that I didn't even know I needed.
Yeah.
But, well, I would say this, I knew I needed something, I didn't know what. I felt like
Sure.
I was discombobulated and not integrated. And that feeling kept growing. Like something is wrong in my head, but what do I do about that? Is
And
that
what is it? You can't put words to it.
it's
very
suppression. For
easily.
me, it was suppression. It was going 100 miles an hour for years in a career, and trying to just go and barrel through. And at some point in life, you just can't barrel through.
Yeah.
Right.
And I didn't want to spend the rest of my life talking about my problems either,
Right.
because that would be an endless loop, in my opinion. I'm not saying talk therapy isn't important. I think it is. But I mean, we can go around the same circle and never get anywhere. So to me, it broke through something.
Well, let's do this, because I'm a little behind in the process, because I have never undergone neurofeedback,
You
okay,
will.
or the Loretta Method, okay. But I think there's a lot of people out there that have the appetite. They're dealing with dark depression. We're looking at our chronic pain audience. We're talking 110 million people in the United States alone, adults.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay? Those numbers aren't decreasing. They're increasing. It's pandemic.
Absolutely.
People are looking for help. And the way the language of the body is, how our mind works affects our emotions, and then our body reacts. So it's a holistic approach. You mentioned heart matters. So my thing is this. How do you get started with neurofeedback? What's the process?
For
For
with us?
anybody. Let's
call Mike
take
and
me.
Jen.
If I was a person coming in with chronic stress and I've dealt with chronic pain for 30 years.
Right.
And I average 4 hours of sleep a night.
Right.
Okay? According to our aura rings that we wear. Okay? How would it help me? How would I get started? How would you know what my normal is? And how would that brain mapping help?
So one of the things that I love about the way we do it, so you come in for a QEEG, you put the jelly cap on, and we read those brain waves, and then he works his magic. But one of the things I love the most about it is if you were to go to a doctor and you're like, okay, I'm feeling really stressed and I'm not sleeping and I'm overwhelmed, they would treat the symptom, right?
Yes.
Or there's a ton of diagnosis like ADHD. You can get diagnosed. You tell the doctor what you're struggling with and they, oh, well, here's your diagnosis. But one of the things I love the most about what we do in brain mapping is, yes, we're listening to you and how you feel, but he's reading your brain. He's listening and finding your brain is telling him what's going on.
That's what really freaked me out about
It's
you,
it's
Mike.
eerie.
So you know
It's
every one of my
eerie.
wife's thoughts.
No, you know what? That's
kidding.
what's I wrote, like, I literally wrote a novel about my life and sent it. He never read it. He
Everybody
literally
does.
never
He
read
doesn't.
any of it.
No.
Well, I'll read it afterwards.
Yeah, well, but then he pulls out the brain mapping, and I couldn't hide my brain if I wanted to at that
Yeah.
point.
He tells you what your brain is saying. And
Yes.
when I had been working there 5 or 6 months and he's like, well, let's do yours. And I was like, And I joked with him, I'm going to make a contract that you're going to sign that says you will not fire me after you see what's going on in my brain.
Smart, Jen.
And it's eerie
Yes.
because he sat there and told me about myself, things that I struggled with that I had never told anybody, and some that I hadn't even put words to. And it's just like, it's overwhelming. But it's also so validating because it's like, oh my gosh, yes, that is exactly how I feel. And I know that's not normal, but I don't know what to do about it or
Yes.
anything. So
Well, let's continue this course here. So we're working with putting this cap on. Is there any shots? Is there
No.
any medication?
No.
Is there any pain?
No.
nothing invasive.
Well, it depends. If I give Jen a hard time, she might poke that gel in a little bit harder, but it's only based on how I treat her at the moment. So be really
my
nice
mood.
to Jen. and
So
then you're
patients
fine.
can come in realizing, okay, this is just an arrangement of how we're going to do the test.
It is.
And this particular modality is going to read, there's going to be a mapping of the brain. We're going to read the signals on which portions of the brain. Is it the cerebellum? Is all the
of it.
lobes?
All of them.
The whole brain.
The whole brain.
And that, I didn't get into this, what Loretta is and how it's even changed since I've been doing it and why I do it. But
Well, please.
Sounds like you set yourself up for a lot of questions.
well, I was leery, as I said, and then when I met with the person in Denver who was doing it, I asked her why she did it, and she said, well, it's safer and there's no side effects. And then when I met Dr. Lubar, I asked him that because, here's a guy he's followed the history, he's part of that history, and he could do anything he wanted to do. Why did he change to do this? And he said it's more effective, it's more efficient, people get better faster, and there's no side effects. And or
There's
very
no harm
little.
that can happen.
Yeah, right. It's hard to mess up. It's very gracious.
Wow.
So let me just back up a little bit with the history. Like I said, it started with NASA and astronauts who were having seizures because they were exposed to rocket fuel. And one of the scientists found that if they trained a certain band or rhythm in the brain, that it stabilized the brain and they quit having seizures and they started sleeping really well.
Wow.
Okay, which we use that same protocol for sleep. A lot of times we do a hybrid protocol where part of it's set up for whatever their problem is, maybe anxiety or depression, and then the side effect of sleep, because sleep's so vitally important for healing the brain or anything in your body. And so what happened in Europe was that they used fMRI because their hypothesis was if we go directly to the sources of the problems in the brain instead of working from the top, would it be more effective? And they found that it was. The big problem with that was fMRI is extremely expensive, hundreds of thousands of dollars for treatment. And so a neurophysicist developed a way to use the locations on the cap and triangulate. And when I tell my prospective clients that I give free consultations with them, and I always hold my cell phone up and I say, they know where we are because they triangulate with satellites onto our phone. And that's the same principle that they're triangulating down. It turned out it was almost revolutionary in terms of accuracy, and they could see a whole lot more of what was going on. And then another neuroscientist actually perfected that to what we're using now. So we started off with a voxel size. A voxel is a three-dimensional cube, if that makes any sense.
Okay.
Like a pixel is two-dimensional on your TV, well, voxel's three-dimensional. Start out with, they could see 1,200 locations in the cortex, and now we can see over 12,000. We can
Wow.
see in the brainstem and in the cerebellum. So we have basically, we don't have the whole brain. I wish we did. There are parts of, the inner parts of the brain that we don't yet have access to yet, like the caudate, for example.
But it's amazing what you do see.
Yeah,
And it's also amazing that you can distinguish things, from my experience, between a traumatic brain injury
right,
versus something else that may be happening in the brain.
right.
I love it when I know that you can map people's brains, and I don't know who the people are. Obviously, you would never say, but I've heard just some stories about maybe this has saved some people's lives. Can you elaborate on that?
Well, one thing, one of my, I've been mentored by some of the best in the business, and one of my mentors is one of the top people in the world at looking at EEGs. He looked at over 1 million, and
Wow.
He's amazing, but he's taught me and other people so well. That's why I can look at a very simple chart and tell you so much about what's going on, either with you or if you've had head injury, or maybe you have the beginnings of something that's cardio. And I've seen the cardio thing, and I share that with the patient. I say, what I'm recommending is that you go get your heart checked out. And part of that is that, off the aorta comes the carotid artery, and it comes to the cerebral artery right here, and it's a straight shot, and that's where people why they have mainly left hemisphere strokes, and because they throw a clot, and that's what happens. And anyway, I had this client call me from the hospital. I told her to go get checked out. She didn't get checked out. And she called me 6 months later, and she said, I'm in the hospital. I just had a heart attack.
Wow.
And without exception, every person that I have said, I think you ought to be checked out. And I can't do that. I'm not a doctor. So that needs to be a medical thing. Yeah. But every person has had something.
And
Yeah.
if I can butt in, when you say life-saving, obviously there is like a heart attack and preventing that. But for me, my thoughts go to the lives I've seen changed, which has saved their life, right? Their family, their emotional life, all of that. It's just, I could tell you story after story after story. And even if you take something simple, right, as, debilitating anxiety and depression, or a mom that, has little kids and she's so overwhelmed that she just can't regulate herself. And then her kids feed off of that. And then they feed each other. And we had one recently like that it changed her life.
Wow.
And her kids' lives. Cause now she can regulate herself. She can keep her temper down. It doesn't go to that level anymore.
She's not overwhelmed.
She's not overwhelmed. Yep.
I got a straightforward question, and we're going to have this as the last one. Today, you see regenerative medicine advertised and market continually. We're part of the neuroscience of how the body works. And it seems like there's this long, drawn-out journey you have to go on with not necessarily having permanent changes.
Right.
There's always short-term amelioration. And then you have to keep going back or repeating the therapies or modalities
Right.
in which you're using.
Right.
Let's talk results with neurofeedback. Okay? How quickly can someone expect to see changes? And are we talking days, weeks, months? What is involved?
Great question. It's different for everybody.
Yeah.
I have one client that after the very first session, he swore he felt better. And I believe that
I
he
think that's
did.
probably placebo, but
Exactly. But
Which is
still,
Yeah.
he felt better.
Yeah.
So, I'm not going to argue with them. Like, that's really hard to, but I don't know
Oh,
if that
we
can
wanted you to
happen.
feel worse.
Right. We've had some people that go through 40, 50 sessions and they're like, I think I feel better, but they can't pinpoint it, right? It's not these huge dramatic changes. But then they call us 3 months later and they're like, my life has completely changed.
Right.
Yeah.
All these, progression kicked in after they were done.
So you might have progressive treatments, but you might see the results later, and you see that
Right.
behaviorally.
Well, can
You
I just
realize
say,
it.
even experientially,
Oh, I know that.
I noticed some changes at about the 10th session in my life. Like around there, I really started going, something's different. I feel
remember.
calmer.
Yeah, you didn't yell at me.
You're like, double cap her.
I'm like, yes, get as many treatments as you would like.
I started sleeping more. But yes, so around the 10th, I also started feeling like I was a little bit more discombobulated because that can happen, I guess, as the brain is re-regulating. I mean, I got a little bit more clumsy or forgetful, or things were happening, but at the same time, other things were happening. But it
Right.
wasn't overwhelming by any means. It
Right.
was just, I noticed that I was different. I was changing. So 40 sessions in was definitely a huge change.
Right.
And then it's been since September of 23 that I had my last session. And we're shooting this at the end of May of 24. And I think what's so neat, I just had myself capped so that we could see if there was any progression or regression, like where is the brain?
What's
Right.
it been doing?
So why don't you say, like, did you see improvement?
Of course I did. and it's probably the hardest thing to explain to people, but we're not treating the brain, we're training the brain, and we're training it.
the brain.
We're training it to normalize, and once it starts figuring that out, it starts training the brain in a similar way, or at least that's our hypothesis. My story was like that. I did 50 sessions and I didn't really, couldn't tell much difference. And then about 6 months later, I'm sitting on the couch and my wife's talking to me and she's a little upset with me, and that always triggered me inside. But inside I'm okay. I'm fine. I'm copacetic. And I smiled at her and she, why are you smiling at me?
Are you mocking me?
Right. And I went, well, honey, it's just that I'm able to hear you in a way that I've never been able to hear you before. I'm not triggered and I'm not sitting here churning inside emotionally. And then I had numerous situations that were replays of my early life, because I didn't grow up in a nice home, and there was violence in my home and alcoholism and sexual abuse in our home. And my response to that was anger. You mess with me, I'm going to mess with you. But I had situations, and so when I was younger, I would do that. And I learned not to do that because my wife told me if I ever did it again, I would not have a wife. And I wanted my wife.
Sounds
This
like
is
she's
back
a
when I'm-
neurofeedback
This is
specialist.
back
Right.
50 years ago, okay, just so you know. But I had a replay of a situation that happened when I was in my 30s. That wasn't 50 years ago, that was 40 years ago. But, and it was the same thing. I was calm. I wasn't ruminating about it or perseverating about it. I was just fine. And this guy was going bazonkers on me. I mean, he was dropping F-bombs left and right. And I'm just sitting there in my truck, and he pulls up and F-bomb this and F-bomb that. And I just said, man, I hope you have a better day.
The valuable takeaway is this that I got: training the brain
Right.
to normalize,
Can
not
I
treating
tell-
the brain.
yeah.
What is your valuable takeaway?
How I like to describe it to people, because I'm usually the first contact and then I connect them with Mike, but is we provide your brain the tools it needs to function the way God designed for it to function.
Right.
We're not changing the brain, we're just showing the brain how to normalize, to start working the way that God meant it to.
Right.
So that's how I like to describe it.
Incredible.
I will add this. Dr.
Please.
Lubar did do longitudinal studies. So he went back a year later, 5 years later, 10 years later, 20 years later. And people he treated 20 years before for depression, 20 years later, still did not have depression.
Wow.
And ADHD 20 years later, and, you know, all these things.
Let's capture that in the next podcast
All right.
show,
Oh,
because
that's
I
so
want to dig
important.
into that. Thank you very much for this session of Gordon and Cherise, podcast number 143. Thank you, guests,
Thanks
very
for
much
having
for
us.
valuable
It's
insights.
so fun to
Thank
have
you.
you guys.
I know, it is fun. I've been
All right.
listening to your podcast. It's fun to be
Thank
here.
you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much.
We'll catch you next time.